Hello and welcome to episode 3. I'm Stats and I'm here with a very special StatsThonk. I'm recording this intro a couple of days after the very interesting interview you're about to hear, which was recorded on Thursday, the 18th of February 2021. Our guests were Tobi and Eclaire, who are two of the players behind the creation of the King of the Sea tournament. They talked to me, Killerbin, and Painezor about the creation and development of the tournament and a recent handover to Wargaming. And so, slightly awkwardly, I'll now hand over to myself. I am joined here for this King of the Sea special edition by the usual Painezor and Killerbin, but also by two special guests. I'm joined by Eclaire and Tobi, who are two of the ex-owner organisers of King of the Sea. Hello, Eclaire.
Hello.
And hello, Tobi.
Hello.
So we're going to be having a bit of a chat for as long as it takes, really, just to go through some of the stuff to do with the recent events. So for those of you that are not aware, King of the Sea, which is the sort of de facto world championships for World of Warships, that the intellectual property for that has recently been sold to Wargaming by the ex-owners, of which these are two. And so there's been some considerable debate within the competitive community about that event. But before we get to that, I just want to go back a little bit because we've probably got quite a few viewers who have started playing the game recently, because King of the Sea's been going for quite a while now, and they may not be aware of some of the roots. So would one of you like to just say where it came from, how it got started, and how you got involved, and what was it like in the beginning?
Okay, I'll field that one. I think it started purely as a player-run thing. You have to have been around a very long time to remember something called team battles, which was Wargaming's first attempt to bring competitive into the game. That was fun, but it was more of a pilot test balloon type thing, if you will, and it was killed off pretty quickly. And then we, along with a bunch of other people, decided, hey, we like this way of playing. We're going to do it for ourselves if it's not being offered in the game. And I was part of a clan, TTT, back then. We got invited to play a server clash against the Chinese server. So not even the SEA server, the actual Chinese server. That was brilliant fun. And then we thought, hey, why don't we see if we can set this up for EU versus NA? And once that was moderately successful at any rate, we got traction with Wargaming, we got traction with Conway. We sat down with him and we thought, hey, why don't we set up a new set of tournaments, something that'll run on a regular basis and kind of form the baseline for competitive in this game. That was basically the idea we were going for. And it really was, in the beginning, there was no attempt at monetizing it, no real attempt at growing it. The idea was just, we want to play this way and it's not in the game right now, so let's build it ourselves.
And there was something, it was just before I started playing, there was this thing called, is it Winter King? Was that it?
That would be the first. So the first thing we ever ran was a EU versus NA server clash, which I'm proud to say EU won convincingly. Hey. That's where our eternal smugness might come from. So that was good. And then the first actual tournament we ran was something called Winter King in, correct me if I'm wrong, Tobi, December of 2016, I think. And has been some time. And
correct.
32 teams, 4 of us with a couple pencils and a piece of paper and a lot of sweating and a lot of panic. And we did more or less pull it off, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we started with thinking about, hey, why don't we run a tournament in maybe January, February? And then Conway said, why don't you do it in 3 or 4 weeks? And we were like, And then we said, yeah, okay, let's do it.
That just shows you actually how long Conway's been around. If he was back in 2016, he was still talking to you then about this kind of stuff. So even, I mean, we're going to talk about the involvement with Wargaming a bit later, but so Conway has actually got as much history with the tournament as you have, in a sense, because you've been talking to him so long. Yeah,
we've been talking. We got very little traction with him early on. See, the dirty secret of KOTS is that we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for NA and Supremacy League. Because, early on, I'm just some guy sending him emails being like, I want all this stuff so I can run a tournament. And he's looking at me thinking, who the hell might you be? And
PMs in the forum, not emails.
PMs in the forum, yes. And so the way we actually got traction was to talk to NA, who were already running their Supremacy League back then. We just went and stole their rules. They had contacts to Wargaming, and it was actually NA that pushed it through. and gave us the opportunity to prove that we can actually pull this off. So respect to them belatedly, despite the smugness that we beat them in the server clash.
And was that the beginning of the sort of branded King of the Sea NAEU tournament?
Yes, I think I came at it that I really like the idea of server clashes. I think that's where I first came at it. I know that today they enjoy limited popularity, and I kind of see why, but I think that was the original idea, because we had no cross server at all, right? So you would there was no cross server clan battles, nothing of the sort. So you would have completely separate metas. I can't think of anybody who back in 2015, 2016 had ground up multiple accounts on different servers. So you really had completely separate metas. And to see those clash, to see how teams learn from each other on an individual server and then meet each other, that was really quite interesting to see and really fun to play.
I think that's still even interesting today. I think it's not quite as different maybe, but the metas certainly are still different, and it is definitely interesting when you see, especially this last King of the Sea, where you brought all the 4 servers together for the first time. That was pretty interesting, to be honest. So okay, so end of 2016 was sort of the beginning. When did King of the Sea actually get called King of the Sea?
Well, the origin of King of the Sea is actually King of the Hill, because in a feat of vaulting ambition, I think the original plan was to run it once a month as a relatively small tournament where you would compete to knock off the winner every time, which is how the origin of that King of the Sea flag that only stays with one clan for the duration of their title, where that actually came from. So it was going to be King of the Hill, and then between that's a little boring, and we're going to run into about 47 different copyright issues. We ended up changing it to King of the Sea. So that's why it's actually called that. And I think the first one was in January or February, very soon after Winter King. This is when we were still thinking every 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah, we basically immediately called it King of the Sea after getting King of the Hill rejected because there are no hills in warships. So from there on, we ran, I have to guess, every 2 months King of the Sea, almost all during 2017, right?
I think, let me get this right. I mean, it spent a brief transitionary period being called King of the Seamount, which is the closest thing we could get to a water mountain. I think so, yeah. I think we ran it 3 times in the spring of 2017, and then we realized that was a lot to ask of the teams and that we were really kind of lazy. And then we slowed it down after that. We did always listen to the community. We were maybe not so much anymore. I would describe myself as decrepit and old and retired. But when we started this up, we were definitely part of the teams that were playing in the semifinals and such. So we had a pretty good eye on how much people wanted to play and how much stress it was. And we went and we asked the teams, and they said, hey, this is too much. Do it seasonally. That was basically the idea, every 3 to 4 months. And then, clan battles came, schedule filled up a lot. And we ended up settling on 2 times a year eventually.
How important do you think it is? How important do you think it is for the organizers of a tournament like that to, at least at some point in the past, have been a competitive player-ish?
Extremely. Well, that's a very good question. And I think it's extremely important that you tie yourself into the community, that you have a sense of what they want, what they need, and where the pain points are for them, and what is a real pain point and what is Discord level complaining. Because let's be honest, people are going to find something to complain about no matter what it is, right? So it is helpful to have once played. To give you an example, an endless discussion is, can you make people play double best of 5s? Because if you want to cast something, if you want to stream something, best of 5s are more interesting to stream. I mean, feel free to disagree. You're all casters. But by and large, that's the idea. You get a longer storyline over a match. But having played in it myself, playing a best of 5, having 25 minutes to come down from an extremely stressful match and then having to go out and do it again, rough. That's a big ask, and you end up with lower quality games. And so that's the kind of thing that as players ourselves, we could go, now I completely see where you're coming from. Not going to happen. No worries.
Definitely. One of the things that I've kind of noticed over the last couple of Kings of the Sea, where I've been fulfilling the role of streamer advisor, basically. So people like you guys or Wargaming, running questions past me, what's this like for the streamers? What do you want out of it as casters? And one of the things that I definitely noticed was obviously what the players want, what the players' experience is not necessarily pulling in the same direction as what the casters want, because what the casters want is, no gaps between the matches. You want every match to be as close as possible with as much drama as possible, which of course is not realistic. And so you have to find some kind of compromise, and that, to me, that's pretty interesting.
Meanwhile, as a player, we're just asking when the next toilet breaks.
Well, no, seriously, I think, both of you, I haven't played in KOTS, both of you have played in KOTS, and many other tournaments. The expectation of the casters to go, right, when's the next match, especially during the finals, where it's the same teams playing. That I think some of us have been involved in competitive sport, and that thought of going out of one match and straight into another one is something you don't really want to be doing. So I have some sympathy for the players, but then we've also all cast various tournaments, and from a caster's point of view, the worst possible situation you can end up in is having to do what Conway calls the monkey dance.
45 minutes of dead air.
Yeah, it's like, okay, there's only so many times you can reiterate what just happened or talk about, recent game news, and then you end up talking about where the pub is on a certain map if you're TC Freer, and it just gets a little bit difficult.
I have seen people filling the void with a couple of games of co-op.
Yeah, it happened to Flambus and I. We went into a training room during King of the Sea once, and or during I can't remember, King of the Sea or a tournament. We ended up shooting each other in Yamatos with no UI just because we didn't have anything else to do. So yeah, you have to, as an organizer, you have to bear that in mind that your casters.
That was when somebody dropped out very unceremoniously.
Yes, I'm sure that's something we'll cover at some point.
Yeah, you're right.
Various incidents that have happened during KOTS.
Definitely on the list of sweaty palm moments, that one.
It's very high up on the list.
So talking about the progression of King of the Sea from sort of this competitor run tournament through to something that's a little bit more solid, did you feel, this is a bit of a leading question, but did you feel as King of the Sea developed as a tournament that the sort of meta and the rules started to pull away from what the game was becoming?
Yes. We always had some rules in King of the Sea regarding, we started with a limitation on smoke destroyers. That was a thing in Tier 8. And a limitation of battleships. We started with 3 battleships and a limit of 2 American destroyers or something like this. So it was already kind of an artificial and forced environment, so to say. And yes, for competitive gaming, you have to modify the game a little bit. When I remember the first competitive I've seen, NA Supremacy League, where 6 battleships on Tier 8 were shooting each other with HE bow on, that was not fun to watch. So yes, you have to put some artificial rules on competitive to make it fun.
You
did say leading question, right? I
did.
presume you mean aircraft carriers when you say that, right?
Actually, no. That obviously is something that was spring to mind, but just the things like, the first thing that I was actually thinking of was that smoke meta, because I do remember when I first started playing and started watching King of the Sea as a new player, that there was smoke was a big thing in tournaments back then.
It was great fun sitting in a Kutas of smoke in my North Cam and not being spotted by anything anything further than 2K from me.
But the question I was then going to ask was, okay, so did you start with the RTS CVs in KOTS? I can't remember.
We did.
Yes.
We comprehensively stole the rule set from Supremacy League. They were the ones with the smoke limits. They were the ones with the 3BB limits at the time. And then the only time we ever looked at the meta and went, Jesus, this is terrible, was during the height of the Kutuzov thing. I remember having a 45-minute conversation with someone about down to the second and down to the meter how you would chain Benson smokes and Kutuzov smokes to never be spotted. And this ended up in the famous Doom Snail meta at the end, right? That is the one time, and we were always very reluctant to do it because it's a level of subjectivity and trying to presuppose what a meta is going to be that we can't even really claim. Even the best players have a very hard time doing it, and I would not claim to be one of the best players. It's not a call I would want to make ex ante, but that was the one time we looked at. We had 2 tournaments in a row where it was really smoke-heavy meta, and we thought, okay, we need to step in, and we need to limit the Kutuzov or remove the Kutuzov and try to move the meta into something a little bit less dominated by long-range BB fire. But
Yeah, but you have to.
okay.
But you have to understand that if you look at smoke, why there's smoke used is because battleships are ultra powerful on tier 8. So in order to make cruisers effective, you basically had to use smoke screens to equal the battleship firepower. And I mean, only one cruiser on tier 8 had a heal. So we discovered that one of the issues of why you need smoke is that there are 3 battleships on the map which dominate and crossfire basically everything on tier 8. So we removed the battleship, and then we thought, what would players replace that battleship with? Which ship would they pick? And we ended up with, why not bring another Kutuzov? It has DPS without any or with less drawback. And that's when we decided that we had to limit it. So smoke is more of the effect of dominating battleships, in my opinion.
Then carriers. So you had RTS carriers initially, which I vaguely remember that. I was a very inexperienced player back then, so I probably didn't really know what I was looking at. But I'm guessing they fit better with the competitive than they did with randoms, where they had a lot of power because of the extreme skills, what I call the skills slope. So, if you're a very, very, very good RTS carrier player, you could completely dominate a very bad carrier player. And because it was so powerful, that would just cause your team to win. And I think the same thing was true in competitive. But when you get up to the top brackets of King of the Sea, obviously you're dealing with similarly skilled players.
RTS carriers were an interesting one. I usually got stuck in the Champayev back in the T8 days. And so the moment the enemy carrier player would bring 3 dive bomber squads to float around behind our entire team spotting us, I would instantaneously die. So there was a certain amount of resentment attached to this. For a while, I toyed with the idea of letting people bring Hoshos so you can spot once. I think the benefit of RTS from a competitive point of view was that it was counterable. From my point of view, and I realize this isn't the consensus one, I thought they provided too much information. I thought they provided too much spotting, but it was an acceptable compromise because they were counterable. It was something where you could match the 2 carrier players against each other and they could deny each other spotting. They were doing effectively no damage at the time. They were purely information systems.
Yeah, I think as a player in the sort of mid, I think my first KOTS was KOTS 6 or 7, and I remember after my team was knocked out and watching as the tournament progressed, the carriers did less and less because the ability of the carrier players became more and more equal, to the point in like the finals where the 2 carriers have effectively cancelled each other out, and it's only until one of them makes a mistake that the other can do anything. I think at that point it was, like the further the tournament went, the less impact the carriers had. That was just as a relatively new player starting to get into the competitive arena of the game.
And on top, each of the ships in tier 8 were spec'd into AA as much as possible to mitigate carrier damage. So carriers were really doing very, very little damage until the very, very end of the match.
And it was also when a lot of the sort of more famous names in the competitive scene started to appear. You started to when Farah started to establish his reputation.
So, yeah, Farah was terrifying to play against, if I'm honest, if you were a tier 8 cruiser player. It was very unpleasant.
I love Farah. I think watching him recently going and playing on the Chinese server before they removed the RTS carriers, and literally watching him family friendly, but
You're going
you know
to
what
die
I'm talking
now.
about, right? Yeah, and thoroughly enjoying himself while he like triangle cross drops a destroyer or something. Yeah, he was something to witness, and as was Fem on the NA server and a couple of others as well. So something I want to talk about with NA actually is ship bans. So they currently run ship bans, and EU, for the last King of the Sea at least, didn't and hasn't.
Oh boy.
Here we go.
And I know this is a
Dig in.
this
Brace
is
yourselves.
Let me just
something that you one or both of you have quite strong feelings about. Do you want to talk a little bit about ship bans and why you didn't do it on EU, and how NA came to have it and EU didn't?
So, Eclaire, we can go for it again.
Yeah, this is actually, you get this twice, right? Because now you have EU versus NA and former, not relevant anymore, admins fighting over what the correct response here
Yes,
might be.
I'm aware.
Go ahead, Toby.
Yeah, I'm here for the rant about ship bans. I said ship bans on EU only over my dead body. My dead body is lying on the street right now, so ship bans are coming for sure.
with a Petra Pavlovsk parked over the top of us.
Exactly. But jokes aside, I don't think that ship bans make a better game, but that's a personal opinion. And what's a better game is irrelevant and very subjective. My bigger concern with ship bans is that how to implement them, and NA implemented them in the way that you switch the rule set during the tournament, which in my eyes is very inelegant. Imagine you play soccer and for the qualification you play with 11 players and then you switch to 6 players for the final, which makes absolutely no sense in my mind. So having this for the whole tournament is also super tricky, especially if you want to embrace the teams that barely can manage to bring 9 people and fitting tier 10 ships. So giving them another hurdle to jump over and another chance to make a mistake so that they lose the game without playing is a no-go in my opinion. That's why I'm heavily leaning against ship bans. I mean, we can debate about the point if it's more fun, more entertaining if you allow it, but from a logistical point of view, I'm very much against it.
What do you think? Sorry, Toby. What do you think about the rule? I don't know which one of you made it, but the rule where recently introduced or ships which are no longer available aren't able to be fielded.
I mean, that's a very much a consensus among all admins. We always had those rules since ships became no longer available. KOTS, for example, because we want more or less a level playing field. Mm-hmm. We want to avoid the point where people are like, you have to bring ship X, but this is no longer available. So I have to buy a Christmas container for €1,000. So I get ship X that fills the slot. The other thing is there's also the same thing, level playing field. We don't want people to invest into a huge grind right before King of the Sea because ship X came out and you need so much research points or you have to buy so much free XP to get it. So we want a level playing field, and that's why we say, hey, we give you enough time to grind it for next King of the Sea. With tech trees, having them at least one full patch before King of the Sea happens in the game is enough time to grind a line. And 3 months, I think, with coal and free XP is also very decent, and 6 months with steel and research point is a fair estimation when everybody can get the ship who wants to get it.
I think that's fair enough. Eclaire, do you want to talk about ship bans?
Yes. Annoyingly, I don't really get to fight with Toby that much because he articulated the consensus bit, which is why we never implemented them. I don't particularly like changing the rules. You can make it through qualifying, running a cheese comp, either a standard cheese comp or one that you came up with on your own. And then the moment people realize this and they ban you out when you get into the group stage or the knockouts, and you go home, right? That's to me at least, that's a somewhat inelegant answer. You want functionally the same rule set and the same game all the way through. I think the bit where we differ, Toby and I, perhaps, and you see this in ships like the Petro, and like you said before, there comes a point where the way you want to play the game competitively and the way that the game is balanced and designed for things like random battles, they're going to diverge. And that's absolutely fine. The devs have come out and said, this is not a development priority of our game. This is not what we build our game for. So we play the maps differently. We play the ships differently. There's a level of coordination you wouldn't get in random battles. And that means that occasionally you're going to have ships that aren't just out of whack in randoms. They happen to be particularly out of whack in the context of something like KOTS, Petro being an excellent example. The problem is that trying to do it ahead of time is very subjective and very, very difficult to do. So we ran a focus group where we got, say, the top 8 to 10 teams that had consistently made the quarterfinals and better. And before KOTS, we would ask them, we would say, hey, is there anything we need to be aware of? What are you looking at in terms of structure? What are you worried about in terms of the meta? And just as an example, when the Petro was released, but before it had been played in KOTS, we really didn't get much from the top EU teams saying this is going to be a disaster. They're going to be everywhere. And I'm not knocking the guys who said this. I'm just saying it's very, very difficult to do something like this ex ante. And ship bans, if you can get around the pragmatic problems of it. I very much appreciate the resistance from EU teams that says, hey, I don't want to have to make my strategy 10 minutes before the game starts. That's not why I'm here. I want to figure out what I want to do, and then I want to be able to practice it and have a plan. That's an argument I have a lot of sympathy for. But as a general rule to say we need to step in and we need a way that the meta can be adjusted for things that aren't really appropriate for competitive play, letting that happen organically within the structure of the rule set makes intuitively a lot of sense to me. Which is to say, I'm not against ship bans. I just think you need to be able to implement them. And we never found a way to implement them that we were all comfortable with. That's roughly my stance here.
To fight Eclaire on this, I think we have seen plenty of King of the Seas, and each King of the Sea had a new meta, which to me showcases that it kind of organically resolves the issue on its own. And maybe I'm not close enough to a high competitive scene right now. But maybe there's a way how to counter Petro with upcoming ships or with the current ships. When hey, they are bringing Petro. You're limiting yourself with Petro. The DPS is not super good. It has its weaknesses. The radar is not very long. So maybe there's a clan figuring out a strategy on how to beat Petros.
Granted, now, compared to Petro now, is nowhere near as oppressive as she was during the last King of the Sea because of the commander rework and the various nerfs she got. But yeah, I can see your point about why banning a ship that might be flavor of the month before you know it's the flavor of the month is always very difficult.
Well, that's the thing as well. I remember having discussions with several casters the first time we saw Petro Pavlovsk in the tournament. Why would you bring a Petro? Everybody was saying that Petro was actually crap. Why wouldn't you just bring a Stalingrad or a Des Moines to fill the same role, depending on what you want, the survivability of the DPM? And then it turns out, actually, when you bring 7 of them, it starts becoming a little bit oppressive for the nearby destroyers. But this isn't something anybody was able to predict would be the meta until we start seeing them en masse.
Exactly.
This is the interesting philosophical question here, right? You want to reward someone who figures out something that nobody else has figured out. The problem comes once somebody figures out that 7 Petros works really damn well and nobody else can figure out the proper counter, right? So in an ideal world, you give people the space to come up with what are effectively cheese comps. I'm going to call 7 Petros a cheese comp here. And then within a week or whatever it is towards the next round, people figure out how to counter it. And the problem to go back to tier 8, the problem with the Kutuzov meta was nobody could really figure out the counter. The counter was to do the exact same thing, but do it slightly better. And in theory, the problem should be able to fix itself. And ideally, the problem fixes itself throughout the course of a single tournament over the course of 3 or 4 weeks that you play. but I don't think that's necessarily something you can rely on. It didn't work this time, right?
Yeah, it's a slow process, and yes, each King of the Sea has a flavor of the month ships. We saw Henry meta, we saw Hindenburg meta, we saw kind of Stalingrad meta, and we saw Petro meta. But each King of the Sea has had its own flavor, and I think that the meta is just evolving so slowly that it's that it takes a lot of time to find a counter strategy because you're playing only so few games against Petro. And my guess would be that if we have another King of the Sea in April or whenever it's happening, even if you would allow Petro, there would be less Petros.
So I can throw the question back to the caster players here. How bad is it? How bad is it to play, and how bad is it to watch?
So I'll take this as someone who's done several King of the Seas now. So I'm honestly on the fence about ship bans because I've watched some. I haven't cast any NA, but I've definitely watched some NA, and I've obviously cast some EU. And watching two teams run roughly the same comp can be very interesting if you know what you're looking at. Because it's like, like I think Tobi was saying earlier, it's interesting to watch experts in their field, whatever that sport happens to be, playing on a level playing field. Everything is equal. It's just the player who is different. And that's very interesting to watch. It's interesting to watch one player play a ship differently to another player. It's watch one caller call differently and place ships differently to the other caller on the other team. But when you watch 6 Petros face 6 Petros, like we almost saw in King of the Sea this time, that's a bit boring, to be frank. And you need variety if you're a caster. You need something to talk about that's not, oh, how many Petros are they going to bring this time? Which is, it got to be a little bit of a joke during the last King of the Sea, like how many Petros different teams are going to bring. And but it's a temporary situation, and I think you're right that this time, if we were going to see Petros in the rules, we wouldn't see as many because of the commander rework and new ships being introduced and teams trying different things and finding counters. So I'm honestly on the fence.
I think we came at this. Sorry to interrupt, but I think this is one of those things that we probably came at more as players. I mean, we always tried to strike a balance between something that would be fun to watch, fun enough to watch that it would get the attention, that would get the support, etc. But ultimately, we started as players, and this is, I think, the kind of thing where we did lean towards the player side. I think all of us were always resistant to variety for the sake of variety or entertainment value. I think a stale meta that's not fun to play is something we really didn't want. But priority was always to have a play style that really was about what's the best team, not what's the most entertaining thing to watch off the top of your head.
Sure.
We would have never run a Mikasa tournament or a bunch of tier 4s duking it out at low tier. That's not what we wanted to do with KOTS.
Another thing that occurs to me with the ship ban system that NA use is that it rewards teams for paying attention to what the other teams usually run, because obviously the bans are done like just before the match roughly, and so you'd have to know, okay, this team that we're facing now in the semifinals or whatever it is, they usually run this comp on this map, and so we need to ban that ship and that ship because those are their key ships, so it's going to disrupt their tactics. But to keep an eye on another team during the tournament that you are also playing in is very difficult. And I think that's maybe a little bit unfair.
There's also the issue of if your team isn't getting streamed, if you go 3 or 4 games without a streamer, the other team that you're playing does, and so you know what they're going to bring. That's a massive advantage to you because you can ban the core of their lineup. I think ship bans in that sense would have to be that every game would have to be streamed, and I don't think that's logistically viable even for a tournament as popular as King of the Sea.
We did toy for many times with the idea of essentially a replay depository, so requiring one replay from every game. But I mean, not to be too cynical, but communities being what they are, it was only a matter of time before people overlaid various hack packages over said replay and used that to quote unquote prove that their opponent must have been cheating. It's, people are suspicious, and the more people care, the more suspicious they get. It's unfortunate. Because truth be told, with a few most unpleasant exceptions, but very rare ones, pretty much everybody just showed up and wanted to play. And that I really did appreciate that. People, by and large, made it easy. They complained, but they made it easy.
There's always the complaining, right? Okay, let's get back to the core topic, because that ship bans discussion is really, really, really interesting, and I'm sure it will interest a lot of listeners. But I want to get back to the King of the Sea handover stuff. So we've talked a little bit about carriers being introduced, talked about what developed the ship bans, but I want to get back to talking about the actual handover. So Wargaming obviously have been working alongside you, the organizers, to put King of the Sea out there, to support it, do like giveaway codes for the streamers and things like that. At what point did money start to become involved?
That's a tricky one. Yeah, go ahead, Eclaire.
I think what happened is that, as we were saying when we went through the history of KOTS, we started it because we wanted to play this sort of thing and we wanted to run a community thing. And what happened was that it got bigger. It got a lot bigger than we had originally anticipated. And that means a couple things. For one, it means if you want to take it to the next step, if you want to look at things like sponsorship, if you want to look at things like selling merchandise, you're going to need proper structures in place. And as things went on, as things like the KOTS collection was added in game, as branded things were added into the game, camos, etc., the question of who actually owns the rights to this kind of thing becomes relevant. There comes a point where, Wargaming is a commercial enterprise. That's perfectly reasonable. They look at things like their marketing ROI. That's perfectly reasonable. It's also perfectly reasonable of us to look at something of this size and say, well, once we start looking, once it's being monetized, once it's a marketing expenditure by a major company, then it moves from being something that we do on the side because it's fun to being something that is closer to work. And the blunt answer from our point of view is there comes a point where we look at it and we say, hey, we don't work for free. And so it's both sides of it. We looked at it and we said, hey, we're putting hundreds of hours into this. If it's going to be something where ownership structures are necessary, we are going to have clarity on what these ownership structures are. And in terms of growing the tournament further, and this is actually the player point of view, what's just happened isn't actually bad if you're a player and if you, trust Wargaming to take it in a direction that you're happy with, which, to be honest, I think you probably should. That's actually a pretty good thing to have clarity on this, because that is what allows you to do things like sell merchandise if you want a KOTS t-shirt. It's what allows you to have sponsorship deals. I mean, Conway confirmed this on his last podcast. The Verizon tournament money would have been available for KOTS. It's just that we in Wargaming couldn't come to any kind of agreement about how to structure the ownership. And one thing we could not just do is say, hey, it belongs to you now wholly and totally, and you're responsible, and we're just going to do the work. That's not really something we were happy to do.
Maybe you can include those links into the description of the podcast. This is King of the Sea 8, where it says at the end, I'm quoting, "This is a World of Warships community-run tournament. Wargaming does not have control of the tournament." And in King of the Sea 10, for example, this line is completely missing. So there's a ambiguity between, or maybe even inside Wargaming, how much is King of the Sea theirs or it's not theirs.
So in the last couple of Kings of the Sea, particularly the most recent one, I became more involved in the sort of the backroom stuff, the behind the scenes stuff. And something that I was definitely becoming aware of was the fact that because King of the Sea was becoming a part of the game, you got the in-game collection, and there was a lot of things starting to actually fall very squarely within Wargaming's own remit. So making the videos and the logos and some of the branding stuff being sort of polished and taken on by them as a responsibility. I was getting the impression, or maybe just guessing, that was starting to cause not conflicts of interest is the wrong word. Just questions about whose responsibility things were. And so do you find that it was getting a little bit frustrating to have this almost not legal dual ownership, but effective dual ownership of the tournament going on?
It was very frustrating for us because we were trying to get hold of Wargaming and Conway and whoever was responsible there for a year or maybe a year and a half to set this into more formal ways so that each of us knows where they are and where we are heading. And we had some quarrels about the logo and T-shirts. We tried to. That was the first time when kind of money was involved. That we were talking with Conway about, hey, why not sell King of the Sea style T-shirts? And he was like, yeah, sure, cool idea. We can do it over the Wargaming store. And then the question rises, what do we do with the money earned with those T-shirts? And we couldn't find an agreement what's happening there. Because they say, hey, this is our logo. This is King of the Sea also belongs to us. So if we sell the T-shirts, you don't have a say what we do with the money. And we were like, yeah, that's not exactly what we are looking for. And we said, yeah, then why don't we sell the T-shirts? And then Conway said, yeah, but you don't own the logo and the art. So that's where we started to grow apart very quickly.
Yes, I think it really goes back to the moment, and this is what I meant, that this whole thing could actually be good for players in the tournament. We started seeing this when the first in-game content came, because in-game content is Wargaming investing dev time, Wargaming investing resources into developing this, and in order to really put time and what effectively resources and money behind it, they need to have the certainty that they can use this in the future. And that's what they now have, right? But we have, like Tobi's been saying, for about 18 months, I think, the moment really investment into KOTS started from Wargaming's point of view, you could start to see, and we started to say to them, we need some kind of clarity here. There needs to be some kind of arrangement, and there's, a ton of different options, and I don't really want to go into what we discussed with them and what we decided not to do for various reasons. But there needed to be clarity about who's responsible for what, and equally who owns what, and this ended up being the simplest option, that effectively, they bought it and we walk away.
So whose idea was that initially?
To sell it completely?
Yeah.
Ours.
Yes, ours.
And did they immediately grab that idea, or was it something you had to persuade them to do?
I think that goes too deep.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair enough. That's absolutely fine. By the way, listeners, we are going absolutely nowhere near anything in terms of like how much or anything like that. So like which island in the in the Caribbean do you now own and things like that. That's not going to happen.
I can confirm there is no KOTS Island being purchased in the Seychelles. No.
KOTS Island. Well, it goes back to the whole King of the Hill thing, right? You could have had Anyway, okay. So an agreement was reached. Was after the last King of the Sea, right? This has been since the last tournament.
I would say that the serious conversation, or the necessity that we were going to have to come to some kind of serious arrangement, I think both sides knew this, or certainly we knew this. We'd been kind of pushing it gently, for a year, maybe a year and a half. I think over the summer, Tobi mentioned the T-shirt story. I think that's the first time it became explicit. Like, there's going to be revenue, and if there's going to be revenue, game is game and work is work. And when there's money involved, no matter what the sums, it's work. And that was this summer, so before the last KOTS.
So going forward, so now that they've bought it, you've handed over the ownership. So I saw the the Discord ownership being handed over. So you are you completely uninvolved?
Yes.
So you're not going to be giving advice or anything like that. You're completely withdrawn.
We have a nice blue color. We kept our color, which is nice. We moved down the Discord ranking hierarchy, and we now have a role as founders. I'm not walking away with terrible amounts of bad blood, and there's a ton of people who helped us build KOTS who are now going off and doing their own projects, things like Team League and BNL League and whatever have you. I feel like I owe these guys. They put their time in to help us. If they want some of my help to build their thing, I'm more than happy to show up. And it's not like we're at war with the wargaming community guys. They put in a ton of effort and enthusiasm, and we could not have built it the way we did if they hadn't been there from the beginning. So if they want our input on something, I'm sure we'd be happy to give it. We're not stropping away, but we have no more executive authority of any kind. Basically, we don't get to call any shots. They can ask us for advice, and we'll give it to them if they want it.
So given that they've just bought it, they've just taken over ownership, and the next King of the Sea is in a matter of, 2 months? Less than 2 months?
I don't think it's been announced yet.
I think it's, like Conway said on that podcast the other day, it's going to be end of April, I think he said.
Yep.
So it's like 2 months. Do you think, so given I've been intimately involved in the last couple in terms of streamer organization. And so because of that, I've seen things like scheduling and all the activities that have to go on, the dozens of adjudicators that you need and organizers. Because to be frank, I've cast quite a few tournaments now, and King of the Sea is by far and away the most well-organized tournament in World of Warships, because as a caster, it's got such a huge amount of support behind it that as a caster, if you lose your schedule or you're off schedule and you need a match, you could just go into the Discord and say, "Hey, I need a match," and one of the adjudicators will find something for you. It was quite incredible, really. Do you think that Wargaming are going to be able to maintain that level of community support to be able to continue that level of organization?
To be frank, no, I don't think so. But maybe King of the Sea will keep this level of engagement, because I guess that they will maybe find a way to put other people in the spot where we were, to be head adjudicators or however you call them, and maybe it continues this way. Thank you for the nice words, but this was only possible because of so many helping hands in the background.
Totally agree.
So if Wargaming is taking over, and those people who are investing their free time into King of the Sea right now don't show up, then they are not in a very pleasant place.
That's my concern.
This is where you cynically tell the adjudicators, "Gents, you have leverage now." Yeah.
Well, so I'm trying to put myself in the position of one of those volunteers. If I'm volunteering for a community-run project, I'm thinking, we're all in this together. We're making this thing together. It's by the community, for the community, which really is the feeling of King of the Sea and all the other player-run tournaments. We're doing this for ourselves, and suddenly I find myself volunteering at a corporate-run event. Honestly, I'm going to be thinking, do I still want to be doing this? I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that question is. Obviously, the individuals will have to decide that for themselves.
I think it depends on how much pushback they feel like they can give. Like, if they can provide any resistance to things that they don't think the community would want, I think they'd be happy to stay on board as long as they have an input in keeping it player-run. Like, it may not be player-owned anymore, but it can still be player-driven. You know what I mean?
I think it's safe to say that Wargaming will not be able to staff that with Wargaming staff. You just need too many people.
To be fair, Dream Eater is running it on CIS server with 80, 100 teams alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, but their streamers can't go on
Yeah.
Discord and demand a match when they fall off schedule.
That's the thing.
That's true.
I don't apologize for that.
That is another question regarding the regional differences between the four servers King of the Sea. Do you imagine that there'll be consolidation and standardization if possible?
I guess so.
And do you have a personal, if you could take bits from all four of the servers, would you, or would you try and keep it as like the European rule set since you're the most used to that? Or do you think the other servers have things that you'd like to implement but don't feel it's suitable at the time?
Back in the ship ban argument.
I think To be honest, I mean, we weren't really, we weren't the bosses of the NA orgs, right? I think we got there first, and then they took over the KOTS branding somewhere around KOTS 5 or so. But we didn't want to tell them what to do. Logistically, it makes sense if everybody has the same rule set. It makes server clashes simpler and that kind of thing. So I can definitely see the argument. But we never wanted to dictate them. And I always, to be honest, I always thought there was value in different servers trying different things and seeing what worked and seeing what didn't work. But from a purely logistics point of view, harmonizing rules makes a ton of sense. Yeah, sure. It just requires, if there's disagreement among the different org teams, you can either try to ram something down someone's throat, or you can say, well, let's just do it our own ways and make sure that we overlap enough that we can play against each other when it's all said and done, which we managed. Although them using ship bans last KOTS and us not using ship bans, that was starting to get borderline. I can see how an NA team might say, this isn't entirely fair to us. We proved how we can play under this set of rules, and now we have to play under a different set of rules. So,
and the EU teams would be saying the opposite way.
Yes.
Yeah, but
both sides
one has to
arguing at the
suffer.
centre. Yeah.
But and it's not a level playing field. You're essentially asking a rugby league team to play against a rugby union team. It's not the same sport exactly. The skills are similar, but it's not the same.
Exactly. I think rugby league and rugby union is a very good example. That's almost...
Hockey and ice hockey.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll go with that. Okay. So I think Wargaming. One thing that is going to come out of this for sure, for better or worse, is the fact that now that Wargaming have control, and they don't have to, consult everyone. If they want to run the same rule set on all 4 servers, they'll just do it. And it'll just happen. So whether that's a good thing, that's another debate. But I think I would be very surprised if they don't unify it, because otherwise, if you're wargaming, why would you want to run 4 different sets of rules? That makes no sense.
The other question is, do they own it on all 4 servers?
Oh, do they? That's a good question.
That's a very good question, right?
Did the contract that you made with them not make that clear?
Okay, time to speak very carefully. The KOTS EU orgs never incorporated as an organization, so we were only ever able to act as individuals.
That's all we can say.
Okay, I see. So as
several islands have been purchased instead of one big island.
several separate sandbanks. So as far as you're concerned, so basically it's the Wargaming EU office who have control of King of the Sea EU. That's fair to say?
The strict interpretation of what happened is that I, Eclaire, have renounced all my rights to King of the Sea.
I see. So they may still have to do some negotiation with some of the other organizers then, in that case.
I could not possibly comment.
Keep it running. Yeah, that's going to be an interesting one to watch if that is the case. But the thing is, they've got access to the in-game assets. That's the interesting. I found it fascinating when they implemented the collection, and they said, "This is a rolling collection. This isn't a one-off. This is something that's going to happen every single KOTS. You get half of the collection one KOTS and half the collection the next KOTS, if you manage to collect all the containers." And I remember seeing that and going, "Oh, that has implications."
The point where I, to myself, said we need to set up proper structure was when that collection was discussed and agreed upon.
Mm-hmm.
That for me was the point where we say, look, this is a proper long-term investment by the company in creating in-game assets that are branded to KOTS. We, at some point in time, will need to settle who owns what, who's responsible for what, and what the arrangement should be. Absolutely.
So I don't need you to answer this, and I don't expect you to, but it's going to be an interesting situation if Wargaming say, right, we're doing King of the Sea, whatever the next one is. So this is what it's going to be. This is going to be the rules for the NA and C and CIS servers. And then like the NA, some people appear who go, hey, we're the NA KOTS organizers. You can't do that. That's going to be an interesting situation to watch if that happens. But I'll leave that one and we can just see what happens. How about that?
I think, and only in very general terms, and we've known Conway for almost 5 years now. Yes, theoretically, you can make a theoretical argument that things could come to a head. I think it's relatively unlikely to be. I think, you could argue that we had intellectual property here. We did obviously argue this, but this is intellectual property we could never realize without the support of Wargaming itself. So there is always value in some kind of amicable arrangement. And I also think that particularly Conway in person is somebody, his heart's in the right place. Totally. Obviously you work with someone for 4 or 5 years and you're gonna complain about them quietly every once in a while. But he's interested in building a tournament. I don't see any real incentive that they would have or any desire that they would have to fundamentally change the nature of KOTS. Things might have to change, but even we shied away. We would have had, and we always said the rules are totally within our remits. We could have come out and said, we think the Petro is terrible. Every single KOTS player, at least a couple players from top 4 or 5 teams came to us and said, you need to ban this shit. And we were always resistant to it. So we were fairly conservative. I expect Wargaming to be conservative. It's a marketing exercise for them. But I don't think they have any intention of changing the nature of the tournament, really.
Just a quick plug for our sister and more mature podcast, Get to Know World of Warships, or Get to Know WoWs. Conway did an interview with them very recently. I highly recommend you go and listen to that, dear listeners, because it's essentially not this is adversarial, but it's the other half of this conversation, essentially, because it's those podcasters interviewing Conway as the Wargaming representative for this transaction. And it's very interesting to listen to his answers to these sort of similar questions, because you can definitely tell that he has the tournament's players and casters, indeed. He has their best interests at heart. He really wants to make this successful. And I'm in the same position. I've known him for several years now, and talking to him on the sidelines of KOTS, he really cares about the tournament. And the fact that he's already come out and said we're not going to add carriers, at least yet, subtext, don't worry, we're not going to drastically change things, just says to me that he really cares. So I'm actually quite optimistic about, at least in the short term, that it's going to stay pretty much the same as it always has been. So that's good. So one of my last questions to you was going to be, are you concerned in any way going forwards that what you created is somehow going to be changed for the worse, or diluted, or lost, or even ended?
Honestly, no. To stretch my answer a little bit, I'm not concerned that they will abandon King of the Sea anytime soon. I think they see it as a very good instrument to please the player base that they are not catering to in any other way. And also they are a bit invested right now. So I don't see that King of the Sea will die within the next iterations. There might come a point where they are like, no, it's not no longer feasible to do such a big qualification stage, for example, and do it like the Verizon tournament style, which would make me sad, but ultimately it's their pick and their way of doing it. Overall, I'm not concerned that they are changing King of the Sea for the worse.
I think I would roughly echo the same thing, actually. For one, I sold my right to be upset, right? The second one is, I think Toby's right. You do it for fun, and eventually you've done it long enough that it has its own inertia. But the thing that kept me coming back wasn't really the semifinals or the finals. The rewarding bit of it is when some team barely scratches and claws their way into the group stages and gets their asses handed to them, and comes and says, yes, we may have gotten slaughtered, but that was really fun, and we have a taste for competitive now, and we're going to train up, and we're going to be back, and thanks for running it. That was the bit that really brought me back. So it's the first 2 weekends, the first 2 days, the group stage, and particularly the qualifiers that I was really attached to. And it would be sad if that went, but it's such a huge investment in manpower that it might not be feasible to keep it going. I don't know. That if I was going to pick a point of worry, that's where it would be. On the whole, I'm not overly concerned. I think, like Toby was saying, I don't think they want to change the nature of the tournament. I don't think they have any particular incentive to change the nature of the tournament. it is, to blow our own horn here a little bit, it ended up being the kind of thing by which the top players in the game measure themselves. And there's every reason for Wargaming to keep it that way.
Okay, then. So, last question about King of the Sea, and I'll open up to the other two just in case they've got any other questions to ask. If there was there anything during your time as the sort of controllers of King of the Sea that you wanted to do with the tournament but couldn't, that you think Wargaming might be able to do because they've got the corporate machination to be able to do it?
Yes. Short answer, yes. Lots of things. I think, to get back to this idea of the manpower of the qualification and the group stages, I have no reason to believe that they will or will not do this. They haven't told us, and if they had told us, we'd probably be under NDA. You could simplify a lot of the grunt work that's involved in getting everybody to the start line by better integration into the client. At a simplistic level, we spent dozens of hours chasing down teams because we wanted, groups so that the streamers would know what was going to happen. The teams knew who they were going to play against when, to give everybody the kind of certainty that would allow us to run. I think the last KOTS was 450 games in 4 hours on the first day. That only works if you know exactly what's going to happen when. And if you do something as simple as in-game pop-ups linked to clan players that are registered for the tournament, you can really get around a lot of the chasing, a lot of the stuff that really just takes a lot of time. And the kind of volunteers and adjudicators who shut up and really said, I'm going to spend 6, 7, 8 hours today running people down to make sure they know when they need to be where and know what they need to do. So increased client integration is something we could never have done. But now that Wargaming owns the whole thing, maybe they have a stronger incentive to invest into integrating KOTS into the game itself. And that is where you're going to get a lot of efficiency and a lot of quality of life improvement for the players too.
And the spectators, hopefully.
The thing that I would wish for is, which I don't think they're going to do, because they've said, competitive is not part of our development, goals. Training room improvements.
Yeah, please.
The training room UI is just dire, and I know they've made some improvements, and like the spectator mode that Mimi and a few others were involved in, that's great. It's fantastic. It was a big step forward, but like that UI, that going into battle, selecting a ship, commander, management and stuff like that from the training room is it's non-existent. So I would like to see that stuff, and maybe like more of the caster overlay stuff, like the sidebars, having coloration for the teams and that kind of thing. That would be amazing as a caster.
That would be very nice. I mean, I would love to see, I don't know if you play, say, League of Legends, where you can spectate any current game on delay, right?
Oh, live replays, please. That would make everyone's lives so much easier.
It would be glorious, but it strikes me as unlikely, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they just don't have the incentive to actually do it as a development goal. Because,
think about it, KOTS without a delay.
Yeah, it's just not a revenue stream. That's the problem. So unless they manage to somehow, make it popular enough that it does become that. But I think that's a bit of a dream. But it would be nice if they make some little improvements. That would be cool. Because anything they do to the training room for competitive is obviously then going to have advantages for players who use the training room for just mucking around with their friends or, whatever it is. So, because we now use spectator mode for various things that we do on stream. So that would be quite handy. Cool. Well, I've got no other questions. Killerbin, Painezor, do either of you have any other questions you would like to ask?
I've got. It's less of a question, more of a sort of a feedback. Like, are there any things that happened during your time running the King of the Sea that really stuck with you? Like, obviously, the famous one is the team just not turning up because they couldn't win anymore. But have there been any other like amusing highlights? People, I know, ranting because of something that they don't agree with, or anything other of that sort? Like that. Looking back, what are the highlights, both good and bad?
So you want the secret history of our screw-ups, right?
Yes, please.
If you like, yeah, please.
Now you've brought it up, I'm intrigued.
That means you have some.
From the outside looking in, it's been fairly flawless over the years.
Conway doing the sign-ups. Sorry,
Please-
Conway.
Please do tell us more.
No.
Oh, come on. Are we going to have to get Conway on for an interview and ask him that question?
Oh,
Okay,
yes, please.
things that were recent and awkward. Oh yes, do you remember when people got to vote for the KOTS camera?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you remember how none of the 10 options ended up winning? Because it
Yes.
turned out that the KOTS patterns didn't actually work in the game.
Yes.
Yes.
That could perhaps have been planned slightly more carefully.
Was that a case of the mock-ups were proposed, Wargaming went in, had a crack at it, and came back and went, these don't work. What do we do?
I think, Wargaming's a pretty big company, right? I don't know how many employees they really had. I think what happened is, yes, they were approved and they were quickly knocked up. And then somebody, once there was a winner, they probably went and looked at it and went, oh, yes, once we apply this to a ship like a Gearing and a ship like the Yamato, one of them ends up looking very, very odd. And so the whole idea got nixed. In terms of our own dramatic, we must have screwed something up terribly. It's part of the reason we tried to be really transparent in terms of why we did things, to build the credibility that people would know, hey, at least they're trying to do it the right way. So that when we did something that went horribly wrong, at least we would have that much goodwill to draw down on. I mean, you tell me. What did we do?
I echo
where
what
you went-
Killerbin just said. I think from the outside looking in, especially the recent Kings of the Sea, they've been very slick.
There was
very
that one
smooth.
time you let Yesod on the official stream to represent KOTS.
The fifth beetle. That was planned all along.
I'm never going to unsee him as that. Yeah, thank
Sorry,
you for
yes,
that. Yes,
Sorry,
if you're
yes,
listening, I'm sorry.
I'm not sorry. I'm the one that photoshopped that.
Actually, Yesod and the adjudicators, and Yesod helped Gita a lot. And Gita's not here today, but he's the one who actually bought and built a lot of the backbone that let us run it with 1,500 players. Tobi can't code, and neither Tobi nor I are any good at Discord permissions, as you're probably finding out now as they try to reorganize it. Gita's the one who really built the backbone together with Asa. The kind of the structure in the back that lets us grow it and keep control of it with 1,500 players and 500 games in 4 hours. So
Indeed.
thanks, Gita.
And I think on behalf of certainly all the streamers and almost certainly all of the players as well, for those of us that have thoroughly enjoyed King of the Sea over the last few years, thank you to the two of you, Eclaire and Tobi, but also to Ator and Gita as well, because I've been seeing, especially in the last King of the Seas, the just huge amount of effort that you guys have put in to setting it up and then just looking after it. But honestly, the last one, I think most of the work, actually on the day certainly, gets done by the volunteers, the adjudicators and the organizers who are running the individual matches and the training rooms and stuff.
Yes.
So a huge, massive thank you to all of those volunteers as well. And if you have an opportunity to carry on volunteering, I would implore you, beg you to please continue doing that, because it makes it so much easier for the casters and the players. So thank you very much to everyone who's been involved in it. And honestly, I hope it continues. I really, really genuinely do. It's been a lot of fun, and I want to continue to see it flourish, because that's your little baby, and it's gonna, well, not little baby, huge baby, and hopefully it's gonna grow into a successful adult tournament.
I agree. I mean, I didn't mention this before, but it's been an interesting run. I don't think I mentioned before that prior to Ships, I'd not only never been in a clan or played competitive, I'd never played games with somebody I didn't know personally. So I managed to run the whole gamut from what is this whole online gaming thing to being someone who helped kind of shape a community and build something that people were really interested in. Not bad. A really, really enjoyable, interesting experience.
Both of you. I think we do have one more question.
Yeah, this is quite possibly the single most important question of the entire day. And it's something that we've been discussing for the last 6 months of spitballing this podcast and be like, one day we're going to have a podcast. And the one thing we agreed to ask every single guest was, how many strawberry laces do you think you can fit up your nose?
5.
5? Okay, good answer.
That was so rapid that implies
Great
he's got
answer
it.
from the German.
That implies extensive German thorough testing, doesn't it, Toby? I don't know. And just
we
to
are
one
under
up Toby,
NDA.
I'm going with 6.
We are under NDA, so we can't comment on this one.
Okay, I think we'll have to accept that answer. Yes, we didn't even tell you what thickness of lace or anything like that,
No.
or whether they're the sour ones or the sweet ones.
Yes, the
Which is a
thing,
very
'cause the
important
sour
distinction.
ones sounds very uncomfortable for everybody involved.
The sour ones are just deliberate cruelty. You can't
Yeah.
do that to somebody.
For anyone who's listening, is going, what on earth are they talking about? Just go and Google strawberry laces, and you will see what we're talking about. Okay.
Inferior Twizzlers for the American listeners.
Yes, indeed. Right, we're
And
gonna
now we're
wrap
off the
it up
air in
there.
the
I think.
States.
Yeah, indeed. We'll wrap it up there. I think I'm going to say a massive thank you for coming on and talking to us about that King of the Sea handover to Eclaire and Tobi. Thank you very much, both. It's been a pleasure.
It has. Thank you for having us, and thank you for all the work that you put in, which you're being very modest about right now. The last 2 or 3 KOTS, you put in a ton of setup work that made our lives a lot simpler.
Oh, thank you very much. I mean, honestly, it was stuff that I would be doing for myself anyway. And teaming up with Flambas, quite often we're working together before the first day to get out the layout sorted out and all that kind of stuff. And it was stuff that I was doing anyway in the background. So I thought I might as well make it a little bit accessible to the other streamers to help them out. And hopefully I'll continue to be able to do that. I'll have to talk to Conway and check that it's okay for me to continue doing that. But it's been really nice to see people using that information to sort of speed up their preparation as a caster. So thank you for the thanks. I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun supporting.
Yeah, I can only second Eclaire on this one. Thank you to all the streamers as well. You made King of the Sea popular. Without streamers, King of the Sea would have not grown to what it is today. Of course, not without our adjudicators. Keep going, guys. And of course, players who are playing the tournament. All those groups are the core of King of the Sea. And as long as there are streamers who want to stream games, as long as there are players who want to play, there will be a King of the Sea. Also, big shout out to Mimi, who did the collection and the spectator mode, who pushed King of the Sea forward massively in terms of recognition and viewability. So thank you to all of you.
Absolutely, and all the best to both of you for the future.
Thank you very much.
Right, we'll end it there. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Take care, Nance.
Bye-bye.
This is Future Stats again, just checking back in after the interview. We hope you found it interesting. If you did, please do share the podcast with your Warships friends. The easiest place to find it is at stats.podbean.com, but it can also be found on most of the major podcasting platforms as well as YouTube. While they didn't get to do a whole lot of talking this episode, you can find my co-hosts Killerbin at twitch.tv/Killerbin and Painezor at twitch.tv/Painezor. I've been Stats, and you can find me at twitch.tv/StatsBloke. Take care of each other, and we'll catch you for episode 4 soon.